If I said to you, right now I'm stood on one of the oldest man-made structures, one of the oldest monuments that you will find in Britain, well, you might think I've gone a bit mad. And even if we flip to the aerial view of here, or perhaps the LiDAR, well, we still see nothing at all. But it's true. Not only am I going to show you today this one that I'm stood on, or attempt to, which spans for miles in that direction, but I'm also going to show you dozens of others around Britain, all from a very specific era of history. When I say there were dozens of these, there really are. In fact, there might even be one near you. So what exactly am I on about? Why am I so excited by today's journey? And if there isn't one near you, well, today's aim is to try and help you find one near you. Welcome to the story of the Cursus, and yes, I did a video on these a few weeks ago, but one specific one in Dorset. This time we're going to look at all of the cursuses in Britain and decide exactly what we think they were used for. Okay, so we did indeed find one of these structures recently, the Dorset Cursus, 6¼ miles long, stretching across the Dorset landscape, built around 3500 BC, built in 2 phases. This one, in fact there's 2 here, Buscot in Oxfordshire. I find myself today under some power lines, and I'm going to use this hedgerow to find at least one of them. Bear with. So that original Dorset Cursus that we found a few weeks back, that was found by an antiquarian called William Stukeley, who may not have known exactly what he was looking at. Its vast length probably didn't appear first as one long connected monument, but now William Stukeley, oh my god, William Stukeley had already found one of these cursuses, and he deemed that it was like a Roman Circus Maximus. He said that was used for chariot racing and all things like that. So he deemed that feature at Stonehenge a cursus.
Hi, I'm Dr. Wendy Morrison, and I'm the Heritage and Archaeology Manager for the Chilterns National Landscape.
And therefore we have that name that sticks with us today.
Well, a cursus is sort of an odd feature. There are about 100 of them in Britain. We know a lot less about them than we'd like to. It's essentially a long, linear set of earthworks that encloses, if you like, a really elongated rectangle.
It took a while, and because of the nature of the cursus shape and potential length, well, this wasn't the most popular of monuments for antiquarians of old to find. But pretty quickly when they were found, ritual and processionary uses were attached. Okay, well, you lovely lot really dislike it if I mention the word ritual. So I'm going to agree with you at this early stage in the video, and we're already going to rule out that purpose. The Dorset Cursus, 6¼ miles long, well, I can't see that being anything like a processional route. Now, look behind me in the hedge. What can you see? That there, slightly raised earthwork in the hedge, because the hedge preserves earthworks, and the plough unfortunately doesn't beyond it. However, there is a line going that way for a good mile or so, and it's preserved here in the hedge as an earthwork.
It's kind of hard to imagine what a cursus might have looked like in its heyday, because so many of them have been ploughed out, but where they are preserved, you get a ditch and a bank, and unlike where we've talked about linears like Grimm's Ditch, the ditch is on the outside of the bank. So what you have is a long rectangular enclosure with a pretty high bank, which has been created from a ditch being constructed on the outside. So you've got complete enclosure of ditch on the outside and a high bank. Now, did they have a fence or a palisade along them? A further enclosure? We absolutely have no idea. But they are really, really long. So you imagine the sort of resources it would take to chop down half a forest to go ahead and put a palisade up.
The biggest issue that archaeologists have struggled with over the years is there seems to be no exact model for them, no specific design that sort of fitted all. Yes, we have twin banks with ditches on the outside and a very elongated rectilinear shape enclosed either end, but even that wasn't always the case. Some examples in Scotland replaced the banks and ditches with lines of pits. So this is the Stonehenge Cursus, probably the most famous, found by Stukeley in 1723 thereabouts, and it's huge. It's 2 miles long, marked really well by this field, and it goes that way, rectilinear shape, for 2 miles. You can see the tree line on the horizon there, that's Fargo enclosure, and it carries on going between that. This end you'd have had a long barrow. Here's the squared top end, and there's a long barrow here, excavated in 1866. And the guy that excavated that said, well, it didn't contain human remains, it contained cattle remains. It was to a degree built around the same sort of era, maybe within a couple of hundred years either side. We don't know that, that's a question for a bit later. But there is another Stonehenge cursus, not just this huge one that goes 2 miles that way. Beyond the trees over there, another mile in that direction, called the Lesser Stonehenge cursus, 400 meters long. Excavations on that one suggested that it was filled in soon after it was dug out. And then on the flip side of that, we have some in use and respected for thousands of years. Drayton cursus in Oxfordshire, for example, survived long enough to be respected by the Romans with some field system boundaries. That's over 3,500 years since its construction.
Orientation can change, so some of them seem to be aligned on what we might consider to be cardinal directions or solar events. There really does seem to be sort of regional variation. So the local customs really that we don't understand are driving the orientation, the length, the width, inclusions, if you like, the sort of other features that are dragged along with these cursuses. Some of them, particularly in the Thames Valley, are on gravels. Obviously ones like in Dorset are up on chalk. And the geology is also affecting probably some of the construction and some of the purpose.
So I guess now we've established what these look like. Now we need to move on and start to consider what this was for. And I always believe that sort of being here in the landscape helps with that. So maybe it does on this occasion here in the Stonehenge cursus.
There's a really broad distribution of these around the country, but as I say, there's only about 100 examples of them, and they stretch all the way from there's examples in Yorkshire, there's a couple of examples in Scotland, but funnily enough, they seem to be a little bit later, and they seem to involve a slightly different construction technique, so post holes and timbers and things like that. But really, they stretch all the way. They're on the chalks, they're in the southwest, they're on the Thames Valley gravels. They're pretty well spread out.
Okay, so I set out with a goal here to map every single cursus in the UK, because oddly they are unique to the UK and Ireland. I opened my spreadsheet and started collating all the data, but I quickly realised this was some considerable task. I have a few different sources, but there appears to be no one single website that deals with all of them. Historic England only lists about 25, despite the fact that we know there to be at least 100. So I stopped. I wanted to be able to help anyone find one that was local to you by the locations of the ones that we already know of. Where do they appear in the landscape? Now, one thing that did crop up from the spreadsheet that I started was a strong association with water, but there were other few factors that we should consider too.
If we think about the sort of effort that goes into making these sorts of linear earthworks, I mean, it's a lot of people power to dig these ditches and create these banks. If it was a hill fort, we'd be like, well, it's on a hill, or it's in a significant plain. And I think cursuses are falling into those locations as well. They are in very significant places in the landscape, but for a variety of different reasons. So it's going to be more of the local vernacular of why they are where they are. And in some places, particularly in southern Britain, we're seeing them in relation to bodies of water, and in particular river courses. They could be located near springs, headwaters, but always in some relationship to water. So there's a fantastic one on the Great Ouse, the ones that I've worked on in the Thames Valley, there's whole clusters of them, and they're running along the tributaries of the Thames.
Okay, so let's flip back to Buscott, where I tried to point something out to you in a hedge, which you might not have been able to see because the camera tends to flatten things out a little. Now, the reason why I went there was because I'd seen some imagery from a very dry summer. We had some hugely distinctive lines at Buscott owing to the dryness. Now, if you're going to search for one of these, this is how. Let's confirm if we do have some connection with water once again. Okay, so I've just flipped back to Buscott because I'm still here trying to find the other bit of the cursus, the other side of the cursus in that hedge. It should be right here behind me. I can see nothing, and if you're disappointed by the fact that you can see nothing too, think of the fact that I've travelled 60 miles to get here. Okay, forgive the grumble here. What about the water? Well, yep, of course we have that association. Through there, beyond, is the start of the two cursus monuments here, and they connect the River Colne all the way through this field over to there beyond that hedgerow you see in the distance, where they connect to the Thames. So this is great. We have a connection of a tributary and the Thames itself. This is exactly as Wendy predicted. Now, not all are like this, of course, but I would estimate, at least with my small amount of research, 75% have some kind of association with water. Does this help us understand exactly what they were for, though?
What we do think is that they are probably linked to use as a processional way. So not necessarily funerary activities taking place in the cursus, but a procession. Perhaps we could imagine people gathering there for certain times of the year and processing the dead along this route, or perhaps they are processing for other major events, solar events, or cosmological events in their lives. We might actually think of these cursuses as public spaces, if you will, but special public spaces. Think of like the Mall. There's an element of exclusion. So if you go into a church space, you are suddenly isolated from the rest of the world. And it may well be that the ditch in the bank is a way of excluding the rest of the world from your ceremonial space.
Huge thanks to Dr. Wendy Morrison for joining us today. If you'd like the opportunity to dig with Dr. Wendy Morrison, then how could they do that?
Well, this summer I'm running an archaeological field school, training excavation, where whether you've had no experience at all or a little bit of experience under your belt, if you'd like to come and get a skills passport and formalise that learning, 6 days. You'll learn excavation techniques, how we record, how we process artifacts, archaeological illustration and photography, all under the hopefully hot summer sun, the first 3 weeks of July in South Oxfordshire. For details, there'll be a link somewhere.
Thank you very much. We'll see you this time next week.